All right. All right, so we're gonna find we're gonna find that I screwed up the graphic here, but we're gonna find that there's not there's not that much to the second house. So, and you know how, or rather not, you know how, but rather you see on Reddit all the time. Well, you see it with all kinds of things, and you see it with Saturn, you see it with everything. But you see it like, why is can somebody give me an idea of what the second house is that doesn't have anything to do with money, or that doesn't have anything to do with with wealth or with money?
Would it be speech? I know that, well, in Jyotish, sometimes they associate it with speech, and as well self-worth.
Food.
Oh, yes, and food. Yes, and food. I've heard that when people have Saturn in the second house, it can give them eating disorders sometimes.
That's right. The voice, food, speech, the voice. That's right, because the throat, because the second house represents the throat. So yes, so there are definitely those aspects. Excellent. But ultimately, not really. Right? What did we do? We had to go to the body part. We had to go, ultimately, all of the things that we just spoke about are coming from the body part, right? Speech, food, voice, right? All that stuff is consumption, right? That goes in the mouth and down the throat, right? Or even the smoke, I smoke my weed, it goes in my mouth, down, into the nostrils, down my throat, or whatever, it goes in, but whatever is going in, that's kind of why Rahu is believed to be exalted in Taurus, right? Which rules the throat. So the mouth and throat that be taking it in, because Rahu is the head of the dragon, and this represents his insatiable appetite. So, so as we can see here, let's see, what we got. Unfortunate, the abode of Typhon. Now, if you watch the eighth house, or if anybody who's watching now it has watched the eighth house, then we talked a lot about the eighth house and the abode of Typhon. And the reason that this is called the abode of Typhon is because both the eighth house and the second house were considered to be gates of hell, gates of Hades. But they had a difference. There is a difference between them. And so, when we talked about the eighth house last time, we talked about Typhon and the myth of Typhon. I got a little bit Jungian, the myth of Typhon, and how Jupiter is the one whose his thunderbolt is what destroys Typhon. And so we were talking about using Jupiter as the antidote to whatever terror or fear is going on in the eighth house. But the second house provides another antidote, because the Greek term for the eighth house is epikataphora, which means falling down into the underworld. The second house is called anaphora, which means coming up out of the underworld. So on some level, you can say that, oh, well, maybe what could be an antidote? We've already seen that as the abode of Typhon, that Jupiter is often the antidote. And we talked about especially the eighth house in respect to that which terrorizes you, that which traumatizes you, that which scares us, the boogeyman in the chart, and our monster in the chart, including our internal monster, the monster that we threaten ourselves with, right? And so we talked about how the eighth house is often the place where we incarcerate ourselves and then put ourselves into the 12th house jail. And so the 12th house is our self-undoing, but the eighth house is where we incarcerate ourselves. It's where the guilt or whatever it is, where we decide on our guilt. And then we decide on our sentence in the eighth house. And then in the 12th house, we serve it. So one of the things that I mentioned in respect to the eighth house then was that Jupiter, representing the quality of mercy, is the antidote, is the remedy for the eighth house, and especially since Jupiter is the destroyer of Typhon. Now, since we're looking at the anaphora, we can also look rather at the anaphora as an antidote, because as we fall down, right, the eighth is what makes us fall down. And when we looked at that was one of those times when we looked at the charts of people in the group. We had quite a few, and it was fascinating being able to kind of get what was the monster in their chart, or what was terrorizing them, where the trauma was, what they traumatized themselves was, or was what they traumatized themselves with, or whether the trauma came from outside of them, etc. So in this particular case, now it looks like what the escape is into earthly things, right? Is into earthly substantiation, is into earthly attainment. Now, when we think of the term attainment, that might be more of a 10th house word, or an 11th house word, really, right? Since we've been talking about the 11th house of the future, what is it? The future, getting our wish, the future attainment of wishes, attainment, there it is, right? But we can also use it in this particular case too, the attainment of wealth, the attainment of substance, the acquisition. So on some level, we can see that there was a belief that there's a way out of the negativity is to come fully into the realm of earthly things, into the realm of earthly things, into the realm of livelihood, right? The first house is the house of life. The second house is the house of livelihood, right? And so the livelihood is how we act out all of the first house aspects, right? Our mental acuity, our skill and our talent, our personal inclination. So that's the first house. And in the second house, the livelihood is where we use all of those things to make our profit, or to build an estate, or to make our fortune, or to find our fortune, or to start a business, or to gain an income. So interestingly enough, unlike Jyotish, which you did bring up, right, and about how, what was it, the second house is food, also the second house in Jyotish is family. I've never really understood exactly what that means, because we tend to look at the fourth house almost primarily as the house of the family, and they tend to look at the fourth house as the mother, like homes and what is it, vehicles and homes, kind of these kind of movable assets, and happiness and mother. And then the ninth house is the father. But in our ancient Western, we look at the fourth house as the father, the 10th house as the seventh from the fourth is the wife of the father, who's the mother. And then there is not this distinction between, as much of a distinction rather, between the second house, which is the actual wealth or possessions that you have, and the 11th house, which is what you gain, which is a house of gain. And what are the two terms they use for the second house? It's dana, which is wealth, and the 11th house is Ghana, which is gain, and Bhagya, which is like, or is it, oh wait, no, Boga, I think Boga, which is like splendor. Okay, so Manilius, this is probably the earliest that we would have. Unfortunate, the abode of Typhon, so we've been talking about that kind of. I've been mentioning this aspect of livelihood and profit, inheritance, estate, fortune, business gain. So, ultimately how one builds substance, how one creates, what's the nature of one's substance, how they would get it, etc. Intercourse with women. Now that's interesting. Now I wonder where that might come from. Intercourse with women. Now, Jupiter represents the second house by Chaldean order. Intercourse with women. I wonder where that comes from. Maybe that'll come back up and we'll see it again. But that's the first I've seen of it. Increase in personal hopes is it this? It's the 8th from the 7th, so I can't imagine. No. Okay. Increase in personal hopes and material possessions, but it's the 10th from the 5th. Which can be romances. Increase in personal hopes and material possessions, expectation of inheritance and wealth, passive and debilitated because it does not aspect the ascendant. It's a gate of hell, right? So it was considered, and if you remember, that's one of the considerations that we were looking at, that it would talk about if a planet is in a house that does not aspect the ascendant. Maybe association with Taurus, maybe so. Libidinous sign, maybe so, maybe so. Although generally we don't see a lot of this kind of sign equals house stuff until the 16th, 17th century. So that, yeah, that's interesting. And we're talking about classical. So there we really didn't tend to see that. But that, yeah, that's a very good possibility, using what they call the Kala Purusha, or I don't know what they would have called it in Greek. Increase in personal hopes, we just talked about that. Passive and debilitate, blah, blah, blah. Alberoni. So now we're coming into the 8th century, 9th century. Nutriment. So food, there's the food. Livelihood. Livelihood again. Assistance. This idea of livelihood. So that's kind of new to me, this concept of livelihood, or rather at least the term livelihood brings a new idea to it, because it really, once again, brings out this idea of how we enact what the gift that we've been given in our first house, how we work out, because once again, the first house is life. And so the second house is livelihood. And so that's just very interesting, because think of like childhood is the state of being a child. So livelihood is the state of being alive, right? So it's how we create an estate out of being alive, so to speak, the second house. Profession of children, right? 10th from the 5th, all right, that makes perfect sense. Estate, fortune, substance, wealth, and poverty. Now we're in Lily, so we're, at this point, it's consolidated. And then modern finance, financial matters and possessions. It hasn't really moved around much, has it? Except, as you mentioned, something you mentioned was personal values, right? What we value. That once again goes back to Venus as the ruler of Taurus, and Venus is what we find valuable, right? It's what we desire, what we covet, what we desire. The word venal comes from the word Venus. So income, feelings. I don't know what the hell that comes from, and I don't really care. But yes, so as you can see, starting maybe from the 3rd century or the 2nd century, 4th century, until even today, pretty much the second house has stayed the same. So this was from the 8th house, and I just wanted to bring it back up, and I just did talk about it. We're understanding that the ascendant represents the emergence of light, and represents the power of which represents the power of the life force in the chart. It not only does it represent the emergence of light, but it represents your emergence into life, right? And so life equals light in astrology. Thus, anything that fortifies the ascendant, right? The ascendant is like the sun, right? Because it's east. It's the eastern point. We talked about that on Thursday. So because it's like the east, because it's like the sun, it's a place of light. Remember, it's if you've been through the traditional astrology course, when we talk about, death and longevity, when we talked about length of life, we talked about the high leg, and the 5 high legical places are the 2 lights, the sun and the moon, the ascendant, which is light, the power, the part of fortune, which is the ascendant of the moon, and then the previous full or new moon, right? So all of those have to do with light, and light equals life, and you have to have a high leg in order to be able to figure out how long the person is going to live. So if you've got a house like the 2nd house, like the 8th house, like the 12th house, like the 6th house, none of which aspect the ascendant, then those are places of darkness. Those become places of darkness, and those become places where the planets go into dark. That's why if you remember, the first thing that we looked at when we were looking at the considerations on Thursday was, is it in an angle? Does it advance or not? Does it advance or retreat? If it's advancing, it's in an angle or a succeeding house. If it's in retreat, then it must be in a Caden house. It must, and even more so, it must be in a house that does not aspect the ascendant. So the aspect that each house makes to the ascendant determines the quality and quantity of life energy the house can share in. This is why angles are considered so strong. This is also why trigons were considered auspicious. This comes from Deborah Holden. And here's just an example of it. And this also, for those of you who were with us on Thursday, this also gives us a very good idea of the right versus left aspects. So considering that this is the ascendant, this gives us our left sextile, square, and trine going through the, going through the order of the signs, and then going against the order of the signs backward, we have our right sextile, square, and trine. So if this were Aries, this would be Gemini, that would be Cancer, that would be Leo. Those would be the left or the sinister aspects. Then behind Aries would be what? Aquarius, Capricorn, and Sagittarius. And those would be the dexter. Left aspects, no, other way around. The right aspects are, because remember, they're above, because they're above. So that's why, especially if you, once you start looking at some of these, especially these older texts, so especially before, even before Bonatti, like Bonatti and before, so 13th century and before, then you'll start seeing that they'll talk often, and from his Dexter square, it'll be like that. And from his blah, blah, blah square, it'll be like this. And so now you know kind of what they mean. And also from what we said on Thursday, it also shows you who is the pivotal planet. Right, so if you have a Mars, let's say Mars is in the ascendant here in Aries, and Saturn is here in the 10th house in Capricorn. Saturn is the pivotal planet in this square because it's to the right of Mars. But if Saturn were here in Libra, then Mars would be pivotal because Mars is to the right of Saturn. Okay, so that's how they would be, that's kind of how they looked at it. And once again, I haven't really looked at it that strongly, but it makes sense because, and especially from a square, because you have a culminating square, right, versus a regular square. Okay, so that was a little bit of a digression, but once again, you can see the places that are dark, right? You can see the places that are dark, 12, 2, 6, 8. Right? And we know that 6, 8, and 12 are considered the worst of the three most malefic houses in the chart. The second isn't, only because it's a place of acquisition, right? It's a place of acquisition. So that's it. It's interesting that, you know, think about where treasure used to be thought of. Like, you know, all my life, treasure was thought of as either under the sea, under, you know, right, all the, you know, the Spanish galleons, you know, the Spanish ships that had sunken, and the, you know, you're looking for hidden treasure, you're looking for the treasure of the, you know, Sierra Madre or whatever. It's under the ground. It's in the ground. It's under the sea. You know, it's underneath. It's below. And so I think that there's an aspect of that. You know, think also what comes from the ground. Diamonds come from the ground. Precious metal comes from the ground. Right, so we have all these, and it's interesting. I mean, I don't really consider, I mean, we call them the earth houses, and I don't necessarily use that terminology, but there's some aspect of the, oh, first of all, the abode of Typhon is deep under the ground, right? It's his father is Tartarus, and Tartarus is the deep, deep, deep ground underneath, the deep, deep, deep below. So like this, you know, like the core of the earth down. So that's the abode of Typhon. So once again, we've got this, and there feels like on some level there's more of a water feeling with the 8th house. Once again, because all 4, 8, and 12 are all about secrets and what's unknown, but then 2, 6, and 10 are all about what can be seen, what can be measured, what can be seen and measured. Right? So that's maybe might be the difference between how we look at 4, 8, 12 and 2, 6, 10. And note that 2, 6, 10 are the opposites of 4, 8, 12. Right? So just something to think about, because I keep wondering why I wonder why I keep kind of gravitating to this deep earth thing for the 2nd house, when we know that the subterranean is the 4th house. But it's also because this is an abode of Typhon. It's deep earth, just like this one. But there's mystery in the 8th that there is not in the 2nd, because we come up out of it in the 2nd, right? We go down into the mystery in the 8th. We go down into the murky waters into the waters where we can't see clearly. We come out in the second. So just me speculating. Balance, gate of Hades. In this place, the benefics do no good. Now we know that that's not necessarily true, but I think maybe they're thinking along this term. Money don't buy happy. I had a friend who used to always say that. Money don't buy happy. And having a lot of money doesn't necessarily make you a particularly happy person, right? It doesn't make you, it can certainly give you a lot of satisfaction, but it can create a lot more problems. So having a lot of money can enhance your quality of life, but if there are other factors in your life that make it stressful, make it miserable, make it untenable, etc., then it's not really, it doesn't really help very much. There are places where money can help, and there are places where money can't help, right? There's places where money can't help. Like if you've got a mental illness that you've got to keep on your meds for, and you don't want to take your meds or whatever, no matter how much money you throw at whatever else, there's not gonna be any help for that. So there's ways in which having money, it makes everything so much easier, and there are areas where money can't drizzle into the little places where having the money can't really help. If you're raised with a family where there's no love, and where you're constantly abused and berated, and you're the Walton family or the Swanson family or something like that, all the money in the world can't make your family life more enjoyable, can't make your life happier, right? There has to be something else. And so maybe that's why the second house isn't really helpful to the general overall happiness or overall picture of the life, except for the financial, except for substance, except for what has been amassed. I'm just, once again, just speculating. Gates of Hades, suspended, the former faces downward, right? Epicataphora going down to the underworld, the latter on its back, so it's looking up. They either fear destruction at the hands of the neighboring cardinal or will fall if cheated of its support. So as we heard this morning with CSG, the fall is 8th house, right? And so the fear of destructions at the hands of the neighboring cardinal, there is an element of keeping up with the Joneses there, or dog eats dog in the business world. Keeping up with the sharks, right? I bite him before he bites me. The monopolies and oligarchies, this fear of destruction. There's the second house. I've got it. I'm king of the hill. Can I hold on to my pile of gold? Condition of Moon and Mercury, key to happiness. I think so, certainly. And ruler of the ascendant. But remember, the whole first session of the traditional astrology class was personal happiness in the ascendant, right? So the whole thing was that really it was the ruler of the ascendant. It was the primary motivation created by the ascendant and the ruler of the ascendant that really provided the main step to happiness. The moon and the Mercury were what's in the person, right? We're actually the substance that makes up who we're talking about, which of course would then contribute to the happiness. But because of the primary motivation of the ruler of the ascendant will kind of say, oh, we want to do it here in this area. So if you had the ruler of the ascendant in the 9th, that would make sense then that astrology would be, because divination and astrology and things of that nature fall under the 9th house. But so generally that's what you tend to see is where the ruler of the ascendant is, that's where they are happiest. That's where they kind of go for. That's kind of what they're into. Remember, we looked at Oprah Winfrey, and Oprah Winfrey started as an interviewer, and she has the ruler of the ascendant in the 7th house. And there's nothing more 7th house than the seating. You seated across from me, interviewing you, and it was Jupiter and Gemini. So asking the questions, getting the information, right, but also making you feel comfortable and all of that. So that's kind of showed that. And we'll look for that in yours when we come to it. But just as are they held to be the dread abodes of Typhon, right? So both of them, so we've just gone kind of into why I believe that might be the case. Whom savage earth brought forth, boom, bam, bam, when she gave birth to war against heaven. Because maybe Typhon is Uranus. Oh, that's what it is. Typhon is Uranus and Gaia's child, and he was born in Tartarus. Tartarus is the name of the area of that part of the ground, that deep part of the earth. And so Gaia is his mother. Gaia, the earth goddess, is his mother. And once again, this just kind of shows you some of the Greek names of all of the different houses. And we see that Anaphora was the name of the gate of hell for 2, and Epicataphora is the name of the gate of hell for 8. Anatole, I think that's interesting. My name is kind of close to Anatole. Thea for goddess, Hypogeon. So interesting names. What does Hypogeon mean? Lowest heaven. Agata Tiche. All right, because Agata Tiche isn't, Tiche is luck or Tiche. Yeah, so Tiche is luck and Agata is good. All right, excellent. And then going on, second, okay, so Alcabisi. So now when we kind of come into possessions and dealings, we've moved away from this issue of Typhon. So here's the thing. I kind of want to come back to this idea of Typhon for a second, because think of how people's money life can really lay them low, right? How, think of the panic. Think of, okay, you are a typical American living in a McMansion that you're kind of stretched to afford in some kind of stupid fucked up suburb where you have to drive to go everywhere. And everybody has the same kind of lawnmower and mows the lawn. Everybody sends their kids to the same school, and they all pay for the same, they all go to do the same, things and go to the same field trips and pay for the same field trips. And somebody in that neighborhood can't hack it. Somebody in that neighborhood financially can't hack it. And as a result, maybe he's doing something like not paying the mortgage, and the wife and children don't know. And maybe he's drinking and he's visiting whores and he's spending all the money and he's not paying the mortgage. And then one day, some man in a suit comes up to the house and says, "Hey, give this to your dad." And it's a notice of foreclosure. So first of all, that man who can't handle what's going on, who can't hack it, is going through a private hell. Wouldn't you say? Right? That person's going through a hell, right? Everybody's talking about inflation right now, right? And talking about how wages are stagnated, right? So we're talking about how wages are stagnated, and all the prices, though, at the same time have gone up, creating this layer of panic. There is this layer of panic. I can see it on Reddit. I can see it, just on social media. People are quietly panicked about how much gas costs, how much food costs, how much rent costs, how well they're going to be able to stretch the money they make to the end of the month. So that person that can't hack it, that has made the wrong decision, who is robbing Peter to pay Paul, who's going and getting the money, what are those called? The payday loans, who can't get ahead, who's treading water. Think of treading water, right? What happens when you stop treading water if you can't swim? You sink, you drown. Who's drowning in debt? Think of now, okay, here we come with these water images. Drowning in debt, sink or swim. Right? So the second house and the realm of money and finance can indeed be a hell. And so we get to see what kind of hell or not is the second house creates. And wealth can create demons, right? So wealth can turn what was a nice, sweet, self-effacing country boy into an absolute monster. who discards people and throws people under the bus, abuses and hurts people, all because of the sycophants that are around them because of all the money they have. So it can create monsters, and it can be a hell. So I guess, I mean, I hadn't really ever thought of it like this, but it makes a lot of sense. And so, you know, even though we've moved away from the Hellenistic period where they placed an emphasis on this, we can still see how it applies. Nothing depresses me like not being able to make rent on time, or not being, like when I'm fighting against the clock it's almost always I'm short and fighting against the, not happening anymore, thank God. But, you know, back when it was, and not happening all that often, but enough that, you know, when it would happen, it would create a downward spiral, like epic cataphora down into the underworld. But you have to come up. But you have to come up out. So the second house is whether or not you can come up out of it. Do you have the resources to bring you out? Do you have the pluck? Do you have the resources? Do you have maybe this is where values come in. Maybe this is where the second house family comes in. Do you have the family? Do you have the family support to bring you out of it? I mean, this is pure speculation. And not second house family, that's Jyotish, not here. But I mean, nothing can spiral people down. Nothing can create a hell like losing control of one's money, losing control of one's assets. And there is no worse hell than having had money and losing it, and losing your fortune. Because not only do you lose your fortune, you lose all of the people that were with you when you had it, because bad fortune is seen as contagious. So, and bad fortune is the name of the sixth house, which has the contagions of illness, right? So there's a projection of contagion of bad fortune. So what you'll notice is that I've known people that for whom this has happened, they've been very wealthy. Matter of fact, I had a very good friend in Thailand. She and her husband moved to Thailand to lower their costs, so that because he had cancer, and they ended up going through all of his money. They ended up going through all of his money trying to, you know, to keep him alive. And she ended up, you know, penniless. He ended up dying, and she ended up penniless, etc. And we were talking about it, and she said, yeah, you know, I don't really contact any of those people again. And I said, oh, I said, probably they stopped contacting you first, though, as things were falling. She goes, oh yeah, you know, huh? And I was like, yeah. So that's the other thing about it. There is no hell like having had it and then losing it. There is no hell like having had it and then all of a sudden losing it. So I think we've seen now why it's the gate of Hades. Now we come into the more practical and mundane aspects. Assets and the means of livelihood. There's that word again. And under officials, we talked about the second house representing your second, right? Your right hand. And it signifies the end of the years of life. They use that term Madaka in the Jyotish room, where they talk about the Madakasthanas, and the Madakasthanas are the second and the seventh, because they are the 12th from the third and the eighth. The third and the eighth are the houses longevity, not the houses of death. The eighth house is not the house of death. It's the house of longevity in Jyotish. And so the second and the seventh are the 12th from that, and anything that's the 12th is basically is the end of it. It ends it. And so we have that. And so the end of youth, I think that's interesting. I would think that might be because it's the 12th from the third, but maybe because it's the second, it's moving away from the first and going into maturity, I think is maybe why. Okay, so now we come into the triplicities. This is one of the only ones of the triplicities where he doesn't give a different area of the house to a different triplicity ruler. For instance, with the fifth house, he gives the first house to children. He gives the first triplicity ruler of the fifth house to children. He gives the second triplicity of the fifth house to sensual pleasures and delights. And he gives the third triplicity ruler of the fifth house to legates and messengers. But here, Daragar does not do that. What he does is he basically says, look to see which of the three triplicity rulers is strongest. And Alan Daragar says about the Lord's triplicity house of assets, namely about the first, second, and third, see which one of them is stronger in being and place, right? In being would be in sign, esse, so that would be essential dignity, and place would be what we call accidental dignity. You will make this one deservedly the authority over assets and the significator over their acquisition. So that is, so I'm sure that this is kind of more an addition. Now remember, Bonatti is now this is Al-Kabisi. We've worked primarily with Bonatti, who we understand is the main compiler of the Islamic tradition. However, this goes further back. We've got actually, Al-Biruni is in the first one, this abbreviation, and this is Al-Kabisi. And we've noticed already that in almost everything that we look at Bonatti, the very first person that he ever quotes is Al-Kabisi. So which, if it were in the midheaven, he will find this from the king. So now they're telling you in what area you'll find it, right? So Al-Daragar says, look at the triplicity rulers of the second house. So if you've got, for instance, Cancer on the cusp of the second, then the three triplicity rulers, let's say it's daytime, are Venus, Mars, and the moon. So let's say Venus is in Cancer in the second. Mars is in Capricorn in the eighth, and the moon is in Gemini in the first. Which one would we use for that, do you think, Shanice?
Is it a day chart or a night chart?
It's a day chart. So Venus would be the first triplicity ruler. She's in the second house. Mars would be the second one. He's in the eighth. There's an opposition between them, and the moon is in the first house. Which one would you give in Gemini?
It would be either Venus or the moon, right?
No, so I wouldn't do Venus because Venus is opposing a
Because
right.
she's being afflicted. Okay, so
Right.
it would be. I was thinking about the moon being in well, because Venus is the triplicity ruler and it's of sect, but I was thinking about the fact that the moon is in Gemini, which is not necessarily a good sign based on the 146 considerations and whether
That's
that
correct.
outweighs the angularity. I wasn't sure.
I would not maybe use any of them, right? We have other techniques. We have other techniques that we can use that we can kind of figure this out with, I think. I think that this is a supplemental, because what ended up happening is Bonatti says, hey, these guys say this and these guys say this. And especially when it comes to the second house. And I thought we'll look at we're going to look at one of the techniques that he works with a little bit. He goes, but you know what? I say this. So that is one of the cool things about him is that he goes, hey, this, but you know what? I've been working on this for a while and this is what I say. And so, I think that and Bonatti does not recommend this himself, right? Bonatti doesn't say, so because you know what he would say, Bonatti would go, and Al-Daragar says, blah, 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 and I say this as well, and I say so as well. But he doesn't. His whole concept is way more involved, way more involved than this. So in my opinion, I wouldn't use any of the three, but I would probably be the most inclined to use either Mars or the moon. And of course, it would depend on because see, Mars is getting the opposition from Venus, a benefic, but Venus is getting the opposition to Mars, a malefic. Do you see the difference?
Yep, that makes sense.
And so these are things to be looking for, and especially since you're working through the 146, when we get into, I think it's consideration 6, which is all about how to recognize when planets are impeded. And so that's one of the things. It's like that's like when we were talking about what direction the person should go on Thursday, right? Then a lot, and somebody's like, oh, that Venus looks yummy. And it's like, ooh, no, she doesn't. Right? We need to be able to recognize those, because Venus is with Mars and Malefic, and Mars is in his fall. Right? So she's not only with the Malefic, she's with the fallen Malefic. That's not yummy. So, okay, so Al-Khabisi said, boom, what did I say? The very first quote he usually is from Al-Khabisi. Substance and acquisition and assistance, your right-hand person, and it signifies the end of youth. And Abdullah said it signifies the aggregation of substance or possessions, and of denaries or bezants, those are coins, and receiving and donations, which is interesting. So donations as well. Second house signifies substance and allies and letters. That's interesting, and it does not aspect the ascendant. And we've already talked about Al-Andaragar, which of them is stronger by condition and place. Likewise, the first lord of the triplicity of the second house gives substance in the beginning of life. So this is also what he usually does, is he usually splits the house into 3 areas of life, and the first triplicity ruler will get the first part of life, second, etc. So what he would say in this is, let's say we were going to use this technique of Al-Andaragar, right? And we found that, let's say instead, it's a Cancer rising chart, and moon is in Cancer in the first. And we decided we're going to use the moon. So then he would say, well, then that shows that the moon, that during the third part of life, that they would be in their best, that it would be best. Because not only is the third triplicity ruler the strongest significator for substance, but also it indicates that last part of life. So that latter part of life will also be the part where they will acquire substance. Make sense? I'm gonna actually come down to, hold on a second. I'm gonna stop the share and do it again because I want to be able to see that. Oh, it gets better, sweetie. It really does. I don't want to be, since I don't want it in. Yep. Okay, I want to be able to read the. See if Scherner says anything different. I don't think he does. Gate of Hell. Okay, so this is the 16th century, and he's already saying Gate of Hell, and is said to be a wealth, property, household furnishings, or domestic substance. Signifies the neck, throat, and glands. We haven't talked about the part of the body yet, but of course we did. We did throat. So neck, throat, and glands. Definitely like the thymus, thyroid, hormones. So the hormones and the lymph glands as well that are in the second. And Jupiter is the co-significator. Of course, Jupiter is the natural significator for wealth. So makes perfect sense. And now, okay, so now what I'm going to do. Oh. Okay, perfect. Okay. What I'm going to do is, so, I mean, we don't need to keep, beating the dead horse. I was going to start with, Judy Garland. This is Judy Garland's, this isn't Lily, this is from Bonatti. And then I thought we could also do yours, which is why I made a copy of this, so I can come in and I can change it for you. But the reason I'm doing it is because, remember what I just said about what Bonatti would have actually done. What Bonatti would have actually done, instead of just, I thought I had this open already. I had to reboot my computer. So let's see, we're talking about nativities. We should be in the second house. No. Okay, here's the third. The second house is one of the most extensive chapters in the entire book. The second, the sixth, the seventh, those are the most, and the 10th, those are the most, those really are the biggest chapters. And when you think of it, what did I say? The second, which is money, fortune, the seventh, marriage, the 10th, career, also a form of fortune, right? Those are the most, and the sixth, which is illness, includes all the techniques for medical astrology. But what you see is he gives us a few different ways that substance would have been found. Now, mind you, what I'm doing is I'm basing this on what we just saw, right? What we just saw was a technique for figuring out which planet represents substance. And he said, so Alan Dazagar says, look to see which of the triplicity rulers of the second house are the right ones. Which of them is the correct one? And when you do that, then you're going to realize, based on where that particular chart, that planet is, you're going to realize kind of which planet is the planet that you should be looking at, and how you're going to do it, right? Just using one of those triplicity rulers. But that's not what Bonatti thinks. So he says, so Ptolemy said that we should look at the part of fortune. And that's it. Okay, we should figure out what the part of fortune. Nor is it contrary to his saying what Umar and Abu Ali said, because Ptolemy made a general statement. So it starts with Ptolemy, and then he goes, if such and such were the significator based on whoever is the planet that rules the part of fortune. But then we come here. This is the one I want. And he says, if you wish to look at the second from the ascendant of the nativity and see which of the planets is in it. So you're going to look at the second. You're going to see any planets in the second. You're going to look at the Lord of the second. That's 3 different places. You're going to look at the part of substance. You're going to look at the Lord of the part of substance. You're going to look at Jupiter. You're going to look at the part of fortune and the Lord of the part of fortune. So that's 8 different places. Then he says, then look at the Al-Muqtas over these places. Now we know that, excuse me, we know that Al-Muqtas means winner, victor or winner, and whether it were one or more, which means that we can either look at the planet who has the most dignity in each of the 8 spots, or we can tally who has the highest score in each of those 8 spots, and the one planet who wins can be the significator. Does that make sense? So have you gotten to that yet? To dealing with compound unmutants yet, Shanice? Good. So we're going to do 2 charts. We're going to do Judy Garland, and then we're going to do you. So here is the Judy Garland chart. Okay. So these are the places that we would need to look at. I'm going to do it from here. The second house, planets in the second, the Lord of the second, the part of substance, the Lord of the part of substance, Jupiter, the part of fortune, and the Lord of the part of fortune. Okay, and then from there, we would find the degree of each of those places, right? So the degree of the cusp of the second, the degrees of whatever planet, and we always round up, right? So if it's at 14 degrees and 17 minutes, we round up to the 15th degree. So 19 Gemini, 30 Leo, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all the degrees. Then for each degree, we use our essential dignity chart, which I will also show us for here for a second. we use our essential dignity chart to essentially tell us what each of the 5 is. So domicile gets 5 points, exaltation gets 4, triplicity gets 3, term gets 2, and decan gets 1 point. Okay, so I'm gonna put this in the chat for you so that you can see it, so that you can have it. And then let's see. Computer. It's in my desktop, astrology, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, everybody. It's the astrology dignity chart. There we go. Okay. Okay, so you can download that now. Okay, so the 8 places are the cusp of the 2nd house. I'm not going to use Neptune. The cusp of the 2nd house, planets in the 2nd. I'm not using Neptune, although that's certainly something. The ruler of the 2nd, which is the sun. The ruler of the part of substance. We're going to look for that in a second. I'm going to go to the Bonatti and show us how to find it. So part of substance and ruler of part of substance, Jupiter, and then the part of fortune and the ruler of the part of fortune. So let's figure out how to find the part of substance. Because one of the things that we like to do is look at the parts that are connected to the houses that we're dealing with as well. So the part of substance is this very first one, and it's taken by day or night from the Lord of the house of substance to the degree of the house of substance, and is projected from the ascendant. Now, this is one of the reasons why this particular part and a few others is one of the reasons why I prefer to use a cusp or a quadrant related chart when I'm using initially, or as my main chart. Because, for instance, there is a part of travel where you take the ruler of the 9th sign to the cusp of the 9th house. And in my chart, the cusp of the 9th house is Virgo, even though the 9th sign is Leo. So that means I'm taking the sun to Virgo, not Mercury, who's the ruler of the 9th. And so there are things like that sometimes when the cusps shift, it can be an important thing. So just a point I just wanted to make about that. So we're going to go to Judy Garland's chart. And we know that 0 degrees, so the first degree of Leo is on the cusp of the 2nd, and 19 degrees of Gemini is where the sun is. So we could go forward 30 degrees, or forward 60 degrees, that is, right? Forward 60, and then back 12. Is that right? No, back 19, back what, 17 or something like that. Forward 60 degrees and back 17. Okay, so forward 60 would be 10 degrees of Virgo. Back 10 would be 0, back another 7. So 23 degrees of Leo. I think I had that wrong on my thing here. So 23 degrees of Leo, also ruled by the sun. So I had 30 Leo. I'm going to go ahead and change that, which means that the last 2 are going to change. So the 23 Leo, or 23 Leo, looks like Mercury and Mars. So instead of it being Mars and Mars, it's now Mercury and Mars. Okay, so we now have 2nd house is 1 Leo. Lord of the 2nd is 19 Gemini. Part of substance is at 23 Leo. Lord of the part of substance is at 19 Gemini, same planet, right? Jupiter is at 9 Libra. The part of fortune is at 22 Capricorn. Saturn is at 1 degree of Libra. So those are all the places that we're looking at for this Almuten. Coming back to the chart or to the table, we can see, it looks like I'm going to have to take 2 off of Mars and add 2 to Mercury. So what we would then do is we would add up how many each planet has. Sun has 5, plus 3 is 8, plus 5 is 13, plus 3 is 16, plus 1 is 17. Right, so there's the 17. And continuing on with each one, Saturn wins hands down. Saturn has 2, 5, 8, 12, 15, 20, 24, 27, 29. So that is the rule. So hands down, as you can see, Saturn is the winner. When we come here to seeing Judy Garland, what's interesting about this is that this is very, very right on the money in a way, because this is also the ruler of the part of fortune, the Saturn. So note that Saturn is exalted. Note that the part of that Saturn is 10 houses away from the part of fortune. So that would be a right, a Dexter square to the part of fortune, but that also means that it would be culminating or overcoming, but especially culminating. And that's a very, very auspicious thing for the ruler of the part of fortune to be culminating from the part of fortune itself or from the ascendant. And also look how it's exalted and it's with the major benefic Jupiter. So this is a person that made lots and lots and lots and lots of money. This was a person that made so much money. The interesting thing, the reason I use this chart is because this is also a person who couldn't hold on to money, who experienced the hell of losing, of being penniless, even though she made lots of money, even though she lived in a really, really high, luxurious lifestyle and had made lots and lots of money. She struggled with money. So you can see from the ruler of the second here, which is the sun is opposing money, exactly, money making versus money holding. And I've talked about that. So this is a money making, but not a money holding chart. And notice that the sun and Mars are mutually applying to the opposition to each other without reception, right? So this is a burn through my money chart. And indeed, that's what she did. She burned through it, and she was penniless. I mean, it was embarrassingly penniless, like where she was going to be kicked out of places she was staying, and to where she also trusted people around her to take care of it, and had no idea that she had no money until it was too late, and just the hell of no money, the hell of what I'm talking about. This person experienced it, right? So on top of the hell of the drug addiction that she had and all of that, there was this hell of financial instability. And we can see the mutable signs, the cholera, right? The intense cholera, the hot and dry sun and Mars opposing each other in these, so this is impulsive and rash and, act before I think, and rushing into it, and dropping $20,000 on a fur coat on a whim, and that, all of that kind of stuff is kind of implied with this particular thing. So we can see the difference between the planet that's bringing the substance in, right? So the planet that allows us to amass the substance, and what happens when we have it, what we do with it when we have it, right? What we and how we do our livelihood, all the disruption in her life. Look at how disruptive this sun Mars is. There was so much disruption in her career. So even when we think about this idea of the second house as livelihood, how the person enacts their livelihood, the sun Mars really shows up in the erraticism of this person's behavior and inability to keep themselves in check. So all right, let's come to the hold on. So the MG1 peripheral. I think we already have. Okay. Saturn in the second, Uranus in the second, Neptune in the second. So I'm only going to use Saturn. I'm not going to use I'm not going to use the Uranus and Neptune. Jupiter in the sixth. So if I were looking at this chart just for a general, is this the 225? Okay. Yeah, okay. If I were just going to kind of generally look, if I were just kind of looking at the chart for wealth generally, one of the first things I would do would just look to see where Jupiter is casually, right? Because Jupiter is wealth, and I see he's in the sixth. So I would see that there are probably some. I would think, okay, there might be challenges, but I want to look to see what else is going on. Then I would see that Jupiter is the ruler of the second, and I would say, oh, the challenges, that's another confirmation of the challenge. Then I would see that Saturn is in the second. And I would say, oh, that's another confirmation of a challenge. So tell me, have you been dealing with financial challenges?
Definitely.
Not enough, challenges of not enough, not being able to expand enough, not being able to, trying to expand, not being able to, not quite having enough, even when I have enough, not feeling like I have enough.
Definitely. And just for context, the issues really started after I had my kids.
Fifth house too, right? Of course, and that everything gets so much more expensive after you have children, right? And so, so you seem to understand when I said downward spiral as a result of money. See, Saturn rules my second, so I go depression. You would too.
Definitely.
So you would downward spiral, paralysis, downward spiral, needing, oh, this is right, we talked about the Saturn needing to push itself out of its comfort zone, but it's not comfortable doing that. We talked, that's right, this is the Saturn. Okay, this is the Saturn we initially talked about, remember? And note that the Saturn is leaving this, was it the trine to the Jupiter? That's the one nice thing, but Jupiter is trining from Saturn's fall. So see, once again, that's problems with my, so part of the karma of this chart is trying to figure out how to make something work financially. Yes?
Definitely.
How? And note that the moon is working for Saturn. So the moon is working for Saturn. He rules what, the third and the fourth? He rules the third and the fourth, but Saturn's in the second. So same thing. So you also might have pressure. Were you raised by your mother? Were you raised by a woman? Oh.
Yes, I was.
Mm-hmm. So so you may have, there might be pressure in the, are you, oh, tell me something. Are you raised in a fundamentalist kind of background, or like or are there fundamentalist ways of thinking about things, very fixed ways of thinking about things in our home?
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And see, because the Saturn is the ruler of it, even though he's, and it would be spiritual, there are very rigid spiritual beliefs in your home, yes, that you come from.
Yes, I grew up in a Christian home. My grandfather with my grandfather. I was raised with my grandparents too. And yep, definitely very strong religious beliefs.
Strong patriarch, yeah. So really, so very patriarchal. Even though the primary parent is a mother, the upbringing is extremely patriarchal and rigid. Now, then why is the ruler of this? So why is that rigid patriarch in the second house? Why is that rigid patriarch in the second house? How does he express himself? How does that rigid patriarch express itself in the second? See, this is where I was talking about. Saturn is in Sagittarius, which is about the adventure, the dominion, the domain, right? But Saturn, that's not really what Saturn creates the enclosure, right? It's the difference between dominion and enclosure. Saturn prefers enclosure to dominion. So with Saturn in Sagittarius, he has to create a dominion, a domain, but that's not comfortable for him because that's too expansive for his thinking. And Jupiter's not helping because he's in the sign of Saturn's fall, where Saturn goes awry. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to actually just take some risks. And you're not going to want to because of this Saturn that's in the second. You're not wanting to because everything needs to be just right in order to do it. But no, and also because there's some voice of a patriarch saying you can't do that thing or you shouldn't do that thing or something like that. But no, there has to be, you have to assess risk. Jupiter is in Aries, Saturn is in Sagittarius. There has to be an assessment and an acquiescence to risk. Mars, the ruler of the ascendant, is in Sagittarius. See, that's the problem in this chart. This chart needs to take risks, but it doesn't have a model for it.
So just to give you a little bit of background, so like I said, I was raised with my grandparents and my mom, right? My mom it's so weird. She is great with money and not great with money because she can always pay her bills, but the problem is the accumulation of debt. And then I have my grandfather that was an entrepreneur, owned his own business, came here from the Caribbean.
I knew it was Caribbean. I knew it was a Caribbean family. I knew it. I was going to ask you if it was Caribbean because this is a work. You got to work. This is really strong work ethic, really strong money ethic. Right. So there's the patriarch in the second, the entrepreneur. And so the pressure from him to do it his way or to do it the way that he thinks it or something like that. Please continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And he set all of my good money examples definitely come from my grandfather. Very, very responsible with money. And, I aspire to be an entrepreneur like him one day, that kind of thing, and as you can hear my kids in the background, but so he set that example. So that I think would be where that patriarchal energy comes from with Saturn in the second and him being an entrepreneur, that Sagittarian energy. But my mom might be that Jupiterian in the sixth, which is funny because her second house, I believe, is ruled by the moon, and her moon is in her sixth house as well.
So right. So she's got to roll sixth house is the dice rolls rolls the twos, rolls the snake eyes or something like that. You kind of got it. It's the dip. It's the dip as opposed to the fall, right? The fall is the eighth, the sixth is the dip, or where things kind of do a downturn. So, and the thing is that we really want to see Jupiter, the benefics we want to see in the angles and in the succeedance, right? Because we want them to advance, right? So here's a perfect example of this, and then we'll go into the mutant. So here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Advancement versus retreat. What's advancing? Mars is advancing. Venus is advancing. Saturn is advancing. What's in retreat? All this stuff is in retreat. Jupiter is in retreat. Now, if we were to look at it from a whole sign, we'd have a different situation, right? All of this stuff would be advancing. But Jupiter would still be in retreat. So that's something we don't like. That's something we don't want. So we know that we know that when we see a Jupiter like this, that either you're going to expand through service. Like I had a good friend who was Pisces rising with Jupiter and Leo in the sixth house, and he worked for Goodwill, and he got really, really high at Goodwill. He got really high through the echelons of Goodwill. But you see what I'm saying? Goodwill, there's Jupiter. And it's a service industry. So it's representing the 6th house as opposed to representing the 10th house of career or representing wealth. I mean, he was substantial. He was fine substantially, but he was also working it through giving, through charity, through the Jupiter, through charity. So you might think about that. Because 6th house is our service. It's our duties. It's the house of servants. So so you need to be serving. All right, so I'm kind of reading your chart instead of kind of doing what I feel like I kind of need to do. So which I love. Well, I need to do both. So I'm happy doing both. So what I want to do with you then now is I want you to feed me the information for these so that we can come up with your mutant of substance. So the cusp of your 2nd house is?
The cusp of my 2nd house is is in Sag. I need to get the degree. Hang on a second.
Degree, yeah, that's what I want. 21 Sagittarius. And Saturn is at 28. Okay, so 21 Sagittarius.
Sorry, because I'm on my phone, it's so hard for me to switch back and forth.
Oh, okay, well then, no problem. I'll take care of it. Then Saturn is at, because I'm right in front of my laptop, so it's not a problem at all. Okay, 28. Okay, then the Lord of the 2nd is Jupiter at 22 Aries. I'm gonna pause and we'll come back when I have all this. Okay, so so what I'm actually doing is, first of all, let me go back to where we just were, where we talked about what Guido Bonatti basically said. Guido Bonatti said that Omar al-Tabari said that if you're wanting to look into what the native's substance, there are 8 places that you're going to look at. You're going to look at the 2nd house, the planet in the 2nd, the Lord of the 2nd, the part of substance, its Lord, Jupiter, the part of fortune, and its Lord. And in this table, all of those are listed, right? So, and this is for Shanice, who's with us right now. So 2nd house, planet in the 2nd, ruler of the 2nd, part of substance, ruler of the part of substance, Jupiter, part of fortune, and ruler of the part of fortune. Now we found the part of substance by taking the ruler of the 2nd, who was Jupiter, to the cusp of the 2nd, right? Jupiter is at 22 degrees of Aries. The cusp of the 2nd was 21 degrees of Sagittarius. So that moves us back 120 degrees and back for yet another one. 17 degrees of Scorpio is on the cusp of the ascendant. We move back 120 degrees to 17 Cancer and move back 1 to 16 Cancer. So 16 Cancer becomes the part of substance in this chart, which is how we ended up finding that. Meaning that the moon is then the ruler of the part of substance. She's at 15 Aquarius, then Jupiter, then part of fortunes in Scorpio, and then the ruler of the part of fortune is Mars, who's at 8 degrees of Sagittarius. Now, what Bonatti says is that you would then find the Al-Mubtaz. The Al-Mubtaz is the winner or victor, and of one or many. He said one or many, and that's what we're actually going to look at right now. Because when he says one, when he says many, he says, okay, who's the Almutin of this? So who has the most points in 21 degrees of Sag? Well, Jupiter has 5, and now Jupiter has 3. That's 8. Mercury has 2. Saturn has 1. So in 21 degrees of Sagittarius, Jupiter is the winner. He is the Al-Mubtaz, or winner. Or Almutin is the term. Likewise, at 28 Sagittarius, Jupiter has 5, 8, Mars has 2, Saturn has 1, right? We can do the same thing with all of these. And right, so and so this is what he means by many. But he also says one or many. And so what we can do is we can either individually find the Almuptazer winner, or we can find the winner over all of these points. Right? So it's not just this winner and that winner and that winner, but someone is the winner of all of these places. And so that's what we're going to look at. So we would do it like this. Jupiter has 5 plus 3, plus another 5 is 13. Wait, 5 plus 3 is 8, plus 5 is 13, plus 3 is 16, plus another 3 is 19, plus 4 is 23. Plus 3 is 26, 31, 34, 36, 37. Jupiter has 37 points. Now, already it looks like Jupiter might be the winner, right? That's a lot of points. Who can anybody beat Jupiter? So we've just done 2 things. We've looked to see who was the winner of 21st Sag, who wins in 28 Sag, who wins in 22 Sag. But now what we're doing is we're looking to see who wins over all of these. And right now, Jupiter has 37 points. So let's see. Now, Mercury is the next planet. He has 2, nothing, nothing, 4, 7. Mercury has 7 points. See how it works? So, well, you might not want to do the charity with Jupiter because it might bring the 6th house things out. Let me come back to the chart and I'll give you something to do charity with instead. It might need to be the sun. Hold on. Okay, so next is Saturn. 1. Nothing. Let's see, up 2. Nothing, nothing. 7. Saturn has 7, same as Mars. All right. Who's next? Sun, 4. 8. That's it. So already it's looking like, it's looking like we want to be using Jupiter. Who's next? Here's Venus finally. 1, 3, 4, oh, 3 rather, 4. Yep. It looks like we don't even need to go on. It looks like Jupiter is really the winner. Anything else even come close? No, it doesn't. We have what, 5 planets already? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nobody is going to come any closer. So based on this particular technique, right, for the mutant of substance, it would be for you, Jupiter. Now, that's kind of problematic, right? Because the Jupiter is in the 8th house. And so this is part of what is so important about knowing what impedes a planet, what is good for a planet. Sometimes a planet represents our substance. And the thing is that one of the things that we learned when we were doing the traditional astrology course was that when we're looking at things that are going to represent either substance that we want to build, then we want the planet that's in the best condition possible. And so in this particular chart, there's one planet that is in really actually quite good condition. There's 2 planets that are in good conditions, actually. Venus is the strongest chart in the planet. I mean, strongest planet in the chart. However, as you mentioned, she is applying to the square of Mars. So if you work her, you're going to get the square. You're not going to just get Venus, you're going to get the Venus-Mars. But we have this not badly aspected moon Mercury. Mercury is in his triplicity. It's nighttime. Mercury is the nighttime air triplicity ruler. And he's also applying to Jupiter. What I would actually do is I would work with this Mercury. So even though Jupiter, how many points did Mercury get? Did we even get to him? We didn't even get to him. Let me just do them quickly. Mercury has, I didn't do them. 2, 4, 6, 8. Oh, I did do them. Oh, wait, no, it's not. 2, 4, 6, 8. Looks like he has 8 points. That's 3, and 3 and 1 is 4. That's 2, that's 6. That's 2, that's 8. Yeah, Mercury has 8. So he and the sun are tied for second place with Jupiter. And Mercury is making the aspect to Jupiter. What you, in my opinion, need to be doing is working the Mercury-Jupiter sextile. Especially because you have the moon as a helper here. And she's the ruler of the 9th. So I would actually do that. And Mercury rules the 11th.
I'm in a Mercury perfection year too.
Good. So when you're thinking about, so of course, reading astrology, right, is a Mercury thing. So of course, when you're thinking about what it is I would be getting substance in, like you're going to be probably attracted to the Jupiterian things. But the Mercury things look like what might really be the most useful and the most helpful. Although, to be honest, I mean, the Venus here is squaring you. Remember, Mars, she's not just squaring Mars in this position, in this situation. In this situation, the Venus is not squaring necessarily Mars, she's squaring you because it's Scorpio rising. You're Mars in this chart, which means that you could actually work with Venus. Do you have any issues with your hips or thighs? Do you have headaches?
No, not really, no.
Okay, so then this isn't manifesting as illnesses, right? So the Mars is because Mars is the ruler of the first and the 6th, and Jupiter is in the 6th, right? So and Mars is in a sign ruled by Jupiter, and vice versa. So see that you've got the mutual reception between them. Even though it's a mutual reception, but by sign, not with any aspect.
Yeah, you did mention though about the hormonal and like thyroid and stuff like that. And I have issues with that coming up.
Oh, okay. And see, that's the ruler of the 2nd and the 6th. So that makes sense. The ruler of the 2nd and the 6th. And then also the Mars in the sign of the 2nd. So yeah, so it looks like throat and stuff related with the hormones in the 2nd house, lymph, adrenal glands, thyroid, thymus, that kind of thing would be.
Yep.
And okay, yeah. So it's that kind of stuff then is what it's pointing to. And see, the Saturn there also points to a problem with that region. So so that's what's to worry about. Also, I was worried because so there's 2 things to kind of deal with. One is grappling with patriarchy. This chart, that's one of the things this chart is dealing with, is grappling with dealing with being as close to patriarchy as you were, and how to use it to your advantage. And then the other thing that's going on is because money and patriarchy are connected somehow, like I've been talking. And so you've got to figure out, one, how to extract it from the patriarchy, or rather how to glean from the patriarchy what's necessary and extract from the patriarch. Once again, Saturn is the patriarch in the 2nd house. And so if indeed your grandfather was the main important teacher around finances, then that makes perfect sense, because Saturn would be grandfathers, and Saturn is the ruler of the 4th, which would be fathers and grandfathers and ancestors as well, which also could point to the thought or the possibility of going into a business that your ancestors have often done. With the Saturn in the 2nd. The other thing, of course, with the Saturn in the 2nd is growing something and selling it. Is stuff from the ground, and noting that the Venus is exalted in the 4th, right? So maybe you could grow flowers and maybe make money. but she's not the ruler of substance, but she's exalted. She's an exalted planet in an angle, and she's ruled by that planet that's turned out to be the mutant of substance. So Jupiter is being pointed to as the mutant of substance in this chart. Sun and Mercury are in second place, but I would really use the Mercury sextile Jupiter as your substance, as what to work with for substance. And Mercury rules the 8th and the 11th, and Jupiter rules the 2nd and the 5th. So how would that, and then the moon is there too, and she rules the 9th. And the 9th is the house of knowledge, right? So it's about, what do I know? It's about knowledge. It's about using knowledge, and Mercury, of course, is knowledge and interest in knowledge as well, right? So curiosity and knowledge. So it looks like it's a knowledge-based thing, whatever it is. Sagittarius, Saturn's in Sagittarius, which is disseminating knowledge. Aquarius is an air sign, which is knowledge and idea based. So it's definitely knowledge based. What it looks like, what I would that you would be going for.
And that's what I've always been, I guess you could say, most passionate about, sharing knowledge. I remember I grew up in the church, and growing up in the church, I participated in the youth group and used to teach in youth group. And I really do like teaching and sharing ideas. I love that. So I'm hoping that that's a thing, and that maybe one day in a few years, maybe astrology might be that thing that I share.
Well, it doesn't have to be the only thing. Definitely, I mean, remember that the 9th house is all teachers and all students. And then Mercury is already the student. And so teaching is all over this chart, really, on some level. And with all the planets and the mutable signs, and Mars in Sagittarius, and all of that, Venus applying to the Mars, and so the intelligence in the chart is a factor, a main factor. And the ability to communicate. And so the intelligence and the ability to communicate is a main factor. So this issue around Mercury is the tongue. So, and also the 2nd house is tongue and throat, right? So, and Mercury is the voice, and the 2nd house is the voice, right? So there's a connection here between Mercury and the 2nd house, because Saturn is in the 2nd house and Mercury is in Saturn's sign. So just keep, so I think, definitely speaking, teaching, anything of that, anything knowledge-based, once again, and idea-based, philosophy-based.
So now, just speaking back to the part of substance being in Cancer, but isn't it in the 8th? Is that like, is that a bad?
No. When I use the part of fortune, well, the minute I start looking at the part of fortune, I start looking at the chart from the whole sign. So I don't tend to look at it from it's in the 8th house. It's in the 9th house. It's in the 9th whole sign house. So okay. And the moon is the ruler of the 9th. So I'm not worried. I'm not putting it in the 8th at all. I'm putting it 100% in the 9th. Yeah, no, it's 100% in the 9th in my opinion. Now but the moon and Mercury would not be at 100% in the 3rd. Would no longer be in the 3rd. They would be in the 4th. Which once again, you know what? I mean, I know that you're really into astrology, but I wouldn't be surprised if somehow you end up being interested in farming. Because Saturn is agriculture, 4th house. You've got the moon and Mercury and Saturn, and they're in the natural 4th.
Okay.
And you could make money from it, ruler of the 4th and the 2nd.
Okay.
And Venus, I see flowers. I see you growing pretty flowers. And selling flowers. Or something like that. Or growing something. But it point, I mean, once again, this stuff is in air, so yeah, I definitely see all the knowledge-based stuff and the speech and all of that stuff too, certainly. But it's also 4th house is intertwined, right? The ruler of the 4th is in the 2nd. So that brings the patriarch once again into the second. Right, it brings something ancestral. That's why I'm saying, oh, maybe you might do something, you might find yourself going into some business that your ancestor is in.
Which is funny. So another, like, I do have a really natural ability to connect with children. And for a few years, I was thinking about doing something like a home-based daycare, something to like opening up a daycare facility, something with kids.
Yeah,
And
that works. Mercury is children. Mercury is children. Jupiter's ruler of the fifth.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, and then whole Venus exalted in the fifth.
Well, she's from the whole sign, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of points out your fertility. You have more than one. You have probably more than 2 children. You have 3 children, 3 or more.
No,
children?
no. I have 2. I actually. So, another interesting fact of like transits. When I had my daughter, the moon was being opposed by Saturn, and I ended up getting my tubes tied.
Oh, got it. Have you miscarried before?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So the Venus Mars, because Mars is more abortions and miscarriages usually with the fifth house stuff.
Yes, I have.
So that makes sense. Yeah. So see how that will show. It'll show up that way because Venus and Jupiter are the main significators for children. They're the main, like Jupiter because of fertility. But how do you get pregnant? Venus, right? So, and then she's the mild, warm. She's really the womb itself is Venus. That's her region. So, and she's even of the same nature as it, kind of a warm, wet environment that the womb is. So, yeah, it makes perfect sense with the square to Mars. This would be interesting with the square to Mars would make this a very interesting love life. Not necessarily bad, but just make it, steamy and passionate. You should have at least one steamy, passionate, like, crazy up and down love affair.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, crazy up and down, and the sex amazing. Yeah, you should.
I'm laughing right now.
Yeah, right. No, but seriously, and like, you knew you should have quit it long ago, but you just couldn't because it was so damn good. That kind of relationship. And there used to be an old disco song. It's you're so bad for me, but it's so good to me. And so that's what you would have experienced with this one, with at least one. Let's see. Yeah. So keeping it to what we were talking about. So kind of I've kind of gone all over the place just having fun. See how I am? You put a fucking chart in front of me, and I just I can't help myself. Mercury Jupiter is your key to substance, sweetheart.
Okay. And I guess one question for you. If I was born at 2:35 instead, my IC-MC axis changes to 1 degree Virgo, 1 degree Pisces.
Remember, we're always going to be looking at both. Right. So that's what I just did. We didn't have to do it, right? Because the end of Aquarius is at it. But even if it were at the beginning of Virgo and Pisces, I would still be looking at Leo and fourth Leo and Aquarius at the 4th and 10th house too. I'd always hold both. Yeah, always hold both at the same time.
Okay.
I'm just gonna stop the recording, but you can continue to ask me questions.